It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL. Paul is Fanatic with a PH _pick on Twitter. We use the word rosterable a lot throughout the 2019 season because that, if you think about it, it was one big preseason game when it came to the Dolphins. Who is going to stick and who is not going to be here in 2020? And right now we're going to take a look on offense at the players that we feel right now, as it stands today, have earned a roster spot in 2020. And if not earned a roster spot, then we'd be very, very surprised if they're not on the team here when the final roster cuts are made in August. Obviously, trades can happen. Free agency, the draft, a lot's going to happen over the next several months, but we're going to go down position by position and see which players have earned themselves a 2020 roster spot. Paul, even though there are 14 draft picks and over $100 million to spend, still a lot of talent on this roster. Maybe not as much as other teams, but some keepable players. When you took a look at this roster and did this exercise, what stuck out at you?
I think it's the number of players that I think we're going to have as rosterable, but could potentially and easily be upgraded. But the thing I love is the fact that they really, when you look at some of these guys, had a ton of people that overachieved this year, which might sound weird looking at the overall record for the season. But if you look at how the Dolphins played down the stretch, they really had some overachievers on this roster.
They did, and we'll get to a few of these as we go position by position. Starting out at the top with quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick overachieved this year, obviously, and he's under contract for next year, as is Josh Rosen. And Jake Rudock also is somewhere on the roster here. He seems to get signed and released every single week. So as far as my first two locks as we sit here today, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen are those two guys for me. Anything different for you?
No, it's Rosen. For a lot of folks, I just want to hit on this real quick. He's 22 years old, guys. I mean, there's older players than him in the draft at the position that are going to get drafted this year. We all need to take a step back. He's gone through a lot of change, and when we hear that he has developed in practice, I'm going to trust that judgment. I know he's not there yet. Miami's probably drafting a quarterback this year. Hell, hopefully they'll both flourish. And it can be something where if that rookie does really well, Miami's got a good problem to have on its hands. They
sure do. And even with the offensive coordinator shift from Chad O'Shea to Chan Gailey, I mean, if there is a quarterback change, then that could possibly happen. But as the roster sits right now, Josh Rosen is 22 years old. He still has a lot of potential. Yeah, he had a nightmare of a first year with the Dolphins, but he's certainly – right now the key lock here for backup for the Dolphins. So 2 for 2 at running back. You know, a lot of changes over the last couple of years, as there is every year at running back. And someone could make the case that nobody at running back is a lock on this roster right now. Kalen Ballage had a historically bad season when he got his opportunity. He's going to be back and he's going to be under contract and in the mix possibly. I'll throw it to you. Do you have anybody as somebody that you think is a lock right now or a near lock to make the roster in 2020?
I've got Patrick Laird as a lock, just because he did show that he can be one of those players that can come in and do some sneaky good things out in space. And unfortunately, while I hate this, until I hear who he's got blackmail photos of, I think given Kalen Ballage's physical tools, this coaching staff gives him one more season, at least to start the year, on the roster. I'm not saying he's going to be the guy. I think Miami does a little bit in free agency in the draft, but I think he ends up on this roster next year. So I've got to leave him in here even though I don't want to.
So I've got Laird as on the 2020 roster right now. So at quarterback and running back, we've got Fitzpatrick, Rosen, and Laird together. Anybody else you'd add to that list so far?
I hate saying it, but Ballage.
Interesting. I would put Balaj as far away from this team as is humanly possible. So that's going to be our
I would
first
too.
disagreement there.
I would too, but I think the coaching staff's enamored with his physical tools, and I think the coaching staff keeps him. So if I'm being 100% honest, I think he ends up on the roster, even though, at least to start the year, even though I don't want it.
And someone I would have had close to it is Myles Gaskin. I mean, he dressed for 7 games this year, and he was drafted by the team as well. So, Dolphins only had 6 draft picks this past year, and Gaskin was one of them. Only averaged 3.6 yards a carry, not a big special teamer. So that'll be a battle at the bottom of the depth chart between Kalen Balaj and Myles Gaskin, because Balaj is not going to cost a lot of money. At wide receiver, this is by far, as we head into the offseason, the biggest strength of the team, as we've talked about. Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and in this scenario, we're going to assume Albert Wilson is going to stay on the roster and is not going to be cut, and the Dolphins save them money because there are a lot of possibilities there. So continuing the list, Allen Hurns and Jakeem Grant. I've got 5 very strong players making the roster there.
Yeah, I've got Hurns making the roster, even though I'm not the biggest fan. Given the fact that Miami is woefully thin at tight end, given the fact that they signed Chan Gailey to be the offensive coordinator, and I know he will utilize whatever personnel he has to work his spread offense, I think Jakeem Grant makes the roster. I think Allen Hurns, Preston Williams, Devontae Parker, Albert Wilson, and Isaiah Ford sneaks in there for me. I think they're going to get a little thinner at tight end, but a little thicker at wide receiver, given how many spread formations I'm picturing them running next season.
I had Isaiah Ford as somebody close, and when you look at the last few games, when he got on the field, he made a lot of impact catches. They didn't go for a lot of yards, but I could make the argument that the Dolphins don't win those last 2 games without Isaiah Ford. The other part of that is he's not a special teams player. He doesn't excel necessarily in one area. So, yeah, and there's going to be a lot of competition for that 6th wide receiver job, regardless of who's there. So I'm going to keep Ford off for now. At tight end, and this is where we may have a disagreement, I'm going to have Mike Gesicki on there, obviously. I mean, this is a player that had tremendous impact as the year progressed. I'm also going to put Durham Smythe on there, making the 2020 roster as we sit there today, because I think he's that blocking tight end in the form of Hunter Goodwin for Chan Gailey's offense.
No, we don't really have a disagreement there. I mean, I like Smythe, and I do think they keep 2 on the roster unless they draft somebody, in which case they might keep 3, maybe. But as it stands today with the current roster, I'd keep the 2 of them.
Along the offensive line, this is where things really start to get messy because there are some decisions to be made, mostly at the center and guard position, and even before we get to free agency, because Daniel Kilgore could be cut, but in this scenario, obviously, we're keeping him on the roster. Michael Dieter could start at guard. He could start at center. He could be the interior backup at all 3 positions. Jesse Davis could be right guard, could be right tackle. Paul, along the offensive line, who are the ones that you point to and confidently say are going to make the roster in 2020?
Dieter's earned his spot, although a lot of fans don't think so. As you pointed out, Kilgore has. Hopefully Jesse Davis gets kicked the hell away from the edge of the line and goes back to the interior. I think Evan Boehm will not be back, as I know we've talked about a little bit. Again, this unit needs a lot of help this offseason. Those might be my only locks right now.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, I've got 4 making the roster. Confidently, I'm going to say are going to be on the 2020 roster. Daniel Kilgore at center and Jesse Davis at right guard or right tackle. And that's not to say Kilgore played great, but if you end up cutting him, you're going to be cutting him to re-sign and keep Evan Boehm, who at this point in his career, I don't think is a better player. And Michael Dieter is going to make the roster because he's a former 3rd-round pick. There's some developmental skills. I hope they do move him to center. And My fourth guy I'm going to have is Julian Davenport, and the only reason for that is because the Dolphins did involve him in the Laramie Tunsil trade. He can play left tackle. He can play right tackle. He's gotten a lot of snaps. He's a big kid at 6'8", 310. He didn't play well at the left tackle spot, but I thought he got a little bit better as the year progressed. At worst, I think he's a better version of Sam Young. So along the offensive line, I've got Kilgore, Davis, Michael Dieter, and Julian Davenport. So overall, on this list, I know you don't have Davenport, and as far as the other guys, Jesse Davis is going to be a lock for you as well, and Michael Dieter is going to be a lock. Is Dan Kilgore a lock for you?
He is.
Okay. So as we sit here today, we agree on several players here. At quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen. At running back, Patrick Laird. At wide receiver, Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, Albert Wilson, Alan Hearns, Jakeem Grant. And at tight end, we've got Mike Gesicki and Durham Smythe. And along the offensive line, we've both got Daniel Kilgore, Jesse Davis, and Michael Dieter. At the tackle spot, I've got Julian Davenport staying, and you've got Kalen Ballage and Isaiah Ford making the roster. So that will do it for our breakdown of which players we think right now have earned roster spots for the Miami Dolphins heading into the 2020 season. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL. Paul is Fanatic_Pick. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. So, Ladie, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what